Hello world, it's Austin. Let's talk about being transgender and Christian. How's it going, everybody? This is a pretty awesome and special video because I asked my supporters over at the Patreon page what they'd like to see. I threw out a couple of options and people got back to me and said they wanted to see this video, so here it is. If you want to be a Patreon supporter and kick me a couple dollars every month for the work that I do with the videos and with the newsletter and with church education and writing the book and all that kind of stuff, head over to the Patreon page down in the description below and you can get inside scoops on stuff and get input, or give input rather, to the videos and things that I make. So yeah, head over there if you want to know more. Let's talk about the Bible. Today we're talking about what it means to be made in the image of God. And this is something that I touched on a little bit in my very first Transgender and Christian video back on, when was that, even years ago, before I was on hormones or anything like that. So if you want to hear tiny, squeaky voice Austin talk about the Bible and talk about Genesis 1, click over here someplace and I'll try to link it, or to at least be in the description below. So let's talk about Genesis 1, and let's talk about what it means to be made in the image of God. In this chapter, God creates all of the whole world and everything else by separating things and by organizing things and categorizing things, usually into twos. So you've got the earth and the sky, and the land and the water, and the day and the night, all these things that are sort of God creates and then organizes. So then we get to verse 27, which is where God creates humans. Verse 27 says, "So God created humankind in his image. In the image of God he created them. Male and female he created them." So as I explained in that first video, it's not surprising that the author of Genesis broke humans up into two categories, male and female, because everything else in the chapter is broken up into two categories, and it's part of the poetic device that the author is using. What is surprising, though, is the way that humans are given something that nothing else in creation has. Humans are created in God's image. Because this one verse holds the idea of the image of God and the creation of male and female, some people over time have sort of linked the two and said, well, God's image must have to do with gender or sex. So what is the image of God? Does it have to do with our minds or our bodies or our abilities or what? Well, here's what a few Christian scholars have said in the thousands of years since these words were first written down. Aurelius Ambrosius, also known as Saint Ambrose, was a 4th century bishop and Roman governor, and he's one of what we call the Church Fathers. He thought that the image of God was essentially your soul. It was what God breathed into the first human. Athanasius of Alexandria was another bishop living at exactly the same time, but he had a different idea about what the image of God meant. Athanasius thought that the part of us that held the image of God was our ability to reason. It was our logic. And he kind of came to that by looking at what everything else in the animal world and the plant world and everything else on Earth had, and then what humans had that was different. And he thought, well, it's our logic and our reasoning, so that must be what it means to have the image of God. Much, much later, the reformer John Wesley preached that the image of God had to do with our moral sense, or our moral reasoning. John Wesley said that Adam and Eve were created in God's moral image, and it had to do completely and entirely with God as love. Wesley once said, "God is full of justice, mercy, and truth, and so was man when he came from the hands of his Creator." The problem, according to Wesley, is that when Adam and Eve disobeyed God in the garden, they essentially fell from that state as part of the image of God, or having the image of God. And so that's why we can't live up to those ideas of justice and peace and sort of a moral perfection, because we fell from that in the garden, according to Wesley. Terence Fretheim, who is a wonderful biblical scholar and one of my favorites, and also one of my former professors, he said that God's image has everything to do with creativity. He points out that everything we see about God and everything we know about God and learn about God in Genesis 1 has to do with God's ability to create. And so when we look at the verse that says, "And then God created humankind in God's image," what we should be thinking of there is what that context of the word God means. It means a being who is infinitely creative. God imagines and makes things, and that's something that humans are sort of uniquely qualified to do in the world. Fretheim also points out that God, in giving Adam and Eve dominion over the world and over creation, God is essentially sharing creative power. So Fretheim says that part of our being made in the image of God and living into being that image means that we have to learn how to share power with other people and with God and with everybody else in creation. Many Christian scholars, including Jürgen Moltmann, think that the image of God has to do with our ability to be relational and our ability to be in relationship with other beings in creation, with other people, and with God. So maybe being made in the image of God means that we are uniquely situated and given the ability to be in relationship with other people and objects and things and in the cosmos. There's so many ways to understand this concept of the image of God. There's really not one right way that we've kind of come down to and all agree on. There are just lots of different theories. We are pretty sure of one thing, though, and that is that this idea of the image of God, as first seen in Genesis 1:27, does not mean specifically our gender and our sex. Way back in that first video I made, I talked a little bit and sort of theorized about if God created humans, male and female, and everybody's created in the image of God, then maybe that means that people with more than one specific binary gender are closer to being the image of God. And while that's a really interesting and cool theory, there's just not enough to support it. And the more that I've read about it, the more that I think that that's probably not what this text means. There are also some people that think that it's a support for the idea of marriage, like only in marriage with somebody of the opposite gender can we truly look like the image of God, because it's, a male and a female coming together, and there's no support for that either. Here's the thing. People have been trying to use this text, this one verse, to oppress other folks, basically, practically since the text was written. Men have used it to argue that they are more like the image of God, and so women need to sit down. White people have used it to say that white people are the only ones with the true image of God, and so everybody else is essentially less than human. And this kind of twisting of a life-giving word is completely unacceptable and wrong. More recently, Genesis 1:27 has been used against trans folks, essentially so that people can take it and go, look, people were only created male and female, and that's what it means to be the image of God, and so anybody who is not either binary, male or female, assigned at birth, that's not okay. Strangely enough, that connection between the idea of the image of God and sex or gender didn't even exist until the late 1800s. That was the first time we started to see scholarship where people thought, maybe the image of God has to do with our bodies. And then pretty soon after that, everybody was like, that's not right either. As the famous scholar Gerhard von Rad once said, for Israel, the polarity of the sexes is something belonging to creation and not to God himself. So what can we take away from all this? Well, the first thing that I want to say, since this is a transgender and Christian video, is that Genesis 1:27 is not saying that you have to fit the gender binary in order to be a living image of God in the world. That's not what this text is about. Second, I want to remind you that you are made in the image of God, and that imprint on you, that something ineffable that we can't describe, that imprint that God gives you infinite worth. And that's true of everybody, whether you're transgender or cisgender or intersex or agender or anything else. Third, I want to remind you that each and every person that you meet today and tomorrow and next year and whenever, they all have the image of God printed on them as well. And that should affect how we treat each other. It's really difficult when you're super angry with somebody or super frustrated or somebody is doing a terrible thing. It's hard to remember that they are also created in the image of God, because in that moment they are not living that out. But they still have that same imprint, so how does that change how we treat them? In the end, I want you to know that regardless of your gender or your sex, you have something that makes you valuable and makes you worthy. And God loves you and gave you that sort of for free. It's kind of a freebie. And it's a really cool thing to think when you feel the worst about yourself. Or like when dysphoria is really getting you down, or when other people are trying to tell you that you are worthless or that you're worth less than other people. No, you have that same imprint. You are still part of the image of God just as you are, and that's kind of a cool thing to remember. I hope you enjoyed this video, everybody. If you've got questions about this, which I totally understand, don't hesitate to let me know. I'm on social media hiatus at the moment while I finish the book until July 1st, but if you want to email me through my website, I'll put that link down below, and I'm still checking that and everything, so if you have any questions or comments or anything like that, leave a comment here, let me know through my website, and let me know on the Patreon. Anything like that works. I hope you have a great rest of your day and that you continue to live into this amazing print thing that we don't get, because It's just cool. Mysteries are cool, right? Alright, okay, that's enough. Have a great week, everybody, and I will talk to you next month. Peace.